And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jamie Wojciechowski.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
And today we are discussing the March for Our Lives rally that happened over the weekend. And I think just the movement at large as well. I guess we'll just open it up. I don't think either of us attended the march, but I'm curious. I guess why you made the choice not to attend, and um, yeah, we'll start there, I guess.
Yeah, actually, you know what? It wasn't really a conscious decision not to attend. I've kind of been unplugged from a lot of things lately. And so in my mind, I knew that there was a rally that was, or a march that was happening on the weekend, but I kind of was getting it mixed up with the other one with the school walkout. And so I kind of
Mm,
just wasn't really aware, and then I kept seeing the date, but it wasn't really dawning on me that it was a Saturday until I had already scheduled work commitments during the time, and so I wasn't able to attend. But I was very excited to watch once I was back and was able to kind of see what was going on and just support it. But it was really um just exciting to see something that was driven by the youth. um
right.
and so, but yeah, I just kind of like, I was kind of bummed out that morning when I was kind of getting ready to do other things, and I was seeing all the coverage, and I was like, oh, how did I not realize that this was today? And so I was kind of bummed out that I wasn't able to attend. But those are kind of things that I have to plan ahead of time and kind of be aware, logistics and stuff. So
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat, I guess. I was a little bit of a conscious decision,
oh,
um, because one is I fully support the rally, but I tend to not feel very comfortable at rallies. It's just not the form of activism I prefer. I go to a lot of them just to be a body and because I support them. But for this one, I thought because I engage in a lot of conversations with people who are on the fence on this issue or just completely disagree. So I thought it was important to watch what was coming out of DC as opposed to what was coming out of LA and kind of engage with people that I knew were on the fence, to try to get them not to change their mind, but to just plug in to what was happening, because I think a lot of their opinions on it are from not plugging in themselves and just hearing secondhand information that they're seeing on social media and stuff like that, and not really having a fully independent, educated stance on the issue, if that makes sense. And I thought that what I liked about it was no matter where you stand on the gun issue, I guess I thought it was just great to see, like you said, the youth kind of empowered and talking about things they care about. And yes, there was a lot of I guess, political talk about what they wanted with gun reform, but I felt there was also a lot of just talk about the youth becoming engaged and feeling like they have power to create change within our political system, which I think is very vital, because I think we, over the last decade, I think and I think it's a while, and I think it's
I
kind of the youth is always kind of under engaged in voting and the political process a lot of the time. So it's just nice to kind of see so many young people kind of um, out there and really caring about this issue.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. That really excited me, and I feel like for me, I think it's been a couple of decades that I haven't really seen youth be as excited to engage in just creating change in some form. And I don't, not saying that it hasn't happened, but I know, like, for myself, when I was graduating high school and going into college, there wasn't really something that like I felt inspired to engage in. I wasn't really like I registered to vote and I voted as soon as I could, which was when I was 18. In that presidential election, I didn't get involved in voting in midterms. Didn't even really pay any attention or care about any of that. But I did vote, but it wasn't like I was like excited and looked at it like this privilege that I get to now participate in creating, you know, the world that we're living in or the country that we're living in. And so I think, but I see that in the youth now. You know, I was when I was watching the coverage, there's a lot of drive to register the youth to vote. And so in California, for example, we have like pre-registration. So 16 to 18-year-olds, if you're not 18 yet, you can start registering and pre-register to vote at 16 years old. And there's been a big movement and a drive in getting youth signed up to vote. And I can see the excitement when you hear these young people talking about the issues and talking about their concern. You can hear that they are educated and they are learning, and they're really I feel like they're not, you know, there's a lot of criticism about just, you know, how much can their voices really, I don't know if it's how much can they understand. I feel like I hear a lot of kind of criticism about like they're too young to kind of understand the issues, and I think, I don't know that any of us really fully grasp all of the issues, which is why I think everybody's voice is so important. And so I love that, you know, you hear and see youth that are really excited to engage and feeling called to engage and to continue the fight, and that they're being intentional about how they're doing it, that they're looking at multiple different avenues to try to create change. And I think that inspires me and gets me excited for how can I support them and how can I create some sort of change in my own work.
Yeah, something that stuck out to me, and it's just since the Parkland students have kind of been in the spotlight, is their kind of view of the world. And to me, it's just a very heightened sense is something I only really see when I'm talking to other activists who are doing a lot of research about the issues. An example is at the rally, the amount of privilege checking that was kind of happening. And it's just interesting because going back to kind of the condescension and that a lot of them are receiving from other people saying that they don't understand the issues and they're too young and all these things. The media doesn't feed us these complex thoughts of privilege and stuff. They make it very kind of mundane and easy to grasp and kind of dualistic. So to see these kids kind of have very complex understandings of issues that aren't covered tells me that they are actually very educated, because they are getting this information from somewhere that's beyond the media and social media and things like that, because they're very, and I don't know if it's the school they're at or what it is, but yeah. And I think that, and it was great to see so much checking of privilege. And what, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say that was kind of one of my, I guess, I mean, I don't know if there's a favorite thing about it, but one of the things that really excited me the most about this march and what I saw with the coverage and how the Parkland students who are leading it really intentionally spoke about their privilege and how they're using their platform and recognizing that they have this big light shining on them right now to shine a light on other people who have experienced gun violence and haven't had that that same platform and that same voice, and that have been fighting against gun violence for a long time. And so they intentionally spoke about Black Lives Matter. They intentionally brought Black Lives Matter activists into the space and provided them with an amplified platform. And I think that really speaks to what you're saying about their deep understanding of these issues, recognizing that it isn't black and white, that it is very, very intersectional and nuanced, and we have to be able to speak to all of those things. And I just, I mean, you look at these young people who, it's like, I feel like we're already forgetting what they experienced. At least I know I do, because of how amazing they are and how articulate they are and how passionate they are about the fight. You forget that this all started 6 weeks ago because they lost people in their community. They lost schoolmates, and they had to experience this severe trauma. And so it's really, really remarkable to me to see how they're able to recognize, even in that they're not, that still they have privilege, that still they have a bigger platform than others, and still be able to see how important it is to talk about that. I think that, like, that was just one of the things that, like, watching the coverage just really gave me chills and made me emotional, just kind of seeing that, because I think that's something that activists have been fighting for, the adult spaces to kind of, the adult driven spaces to kind of curate that, and to be able to recognize that and be more aware of the privilege. And I think that, like, it seems like it's a lot harder for us, older, adult activists to do it than it is for these young people to really just kind of recognize that and make that a very important part of their fight.
Right. And I think we talked about idealism on the last episode, and I think that's a big part of it. And I think too, there's it's interesting because the more young people who are involved I talk to, it's interesting, the more I see them kind of rebelling against the oversimplification of issues, right? And they're sick of the partisan BS and the talking points and the kind of distractions, right? They want real solutions. And I think the thing that makes them so effective is that because they want real solutions, and they're not just fighting for one thing no matter what. They're seeing things as they really are, and that is that intersectionality, and they see that gun violence is connected to systemic racism and is connected to the economic situation in our country, and they see how everything kind of works together, and that there's not one blanket solution, and it's very counter to, again, the media narrative we're given, that these issues are all separate and that there's fixes for each thing, but that they somehow don't touch one another.
No, that's a really important point, is that it's like they haven't really joined a team yet or a faction, as far as like what they've kind of decided. Like, a lot of adults have become so tribal in their viewpoints and their politics that they're unwilling to see something else, and so anything that could possibly threaten that viewpoint gets deflected, gets pushed out, whereas they're just looking for, like, what do we do about this? Like, this is an issue, and we haven't even, we're still developing how we feel about, you know what I mean? It's like they haven't really gotten these, like, I don't even want to use the word partisan, but just kind of these, like, cemented in viewpoints that I think oftentimes we kind of, as adults, have kind of cloaked ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they're just talking points, right? It's the difference between actually wanting to engage mindfully to fix a problem and just sticking to your talking point, because I think that in the gun control debate, I think the problem is that there really is no debate. There's those who are that really want gun reform, and then there's the other side doesn't really say anything. They scream like mental health and all these things, but they don't propose anything to actually fix it. And when they propose things, they're just, I mean, they're ridiculous, like the arming teachers and things like that. They're just, it's not things that are going to be helpful.
Isn't that what one of the
recently said?
Rick
Yeah.
Santorum said? Yeah. Like, okay. Yeah.
So,
But
so
we have
yeah,
deflections, and it's
yeah, and I just feel like if, and I have this conversation a lot with people who own guns and are very passionate about the Second Amendment, and even they are able to see that we need to focus on solutions, and they have ideas. They're just kind of drowned out, right? Because
right,
it's a complex
right,
it's a complex situation, and it makes it harder when, again, the media and the politicians try to overly simplify it, because you kind of get into this, well, do gun laws work, and gun laws, or they don't work, and it's like, well, that's not how reality works. Like, certain laws are going to work better than others, so we have to look at where has this worked, and what was the situation that allowed this to work versus where this doesn't work. um,
right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that like that happens, and that like it's like all the gray gets drowned out. And
mhm.
so we're only listening to the very like very very polarized black and the very very polarized white, and anything in between and kind of the gray more nuanced solutions nobody's listening to. But also those things aren't, I think, is fun to debate about. I think those things are less like those things are less enticing. And so it's
Mhm.
hard because we also have to balance the fact that like humans, as humans, we're drawn to certain things. And so you see why the news cycle kind of goes over certain things over and over and over again, because that's what we're drawn to. We're drawn to those things, even if it's broadening our awareness or not. We're
Yeah.
very drawn to certain kind of types of things. And so I think like the conversations that are more nuanced and actually more solution focused totally get drowned out. And then I think there's this um epidemic of like whataboutism, where it's just, well, what about this and what about that, and all these things are kind of brought into it. And actually I wanted to ask you about one thing that really, I mean, I guess it didn't bother me because I've expected this kind of a response, but I guess just every time I see it, I'm just, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about it. So one of the responses that I've seen with the Parkland students and the marches, and how big the marches were and how much support they got, how much coverage they got, was that it was paid for by, I don't even know, like a bunch of different people that are not these students, and that they really didn't organize this themselves, and that they're not ones that have these viewpoints, and that it's kind of like driven by other liberal organizations that are kind of behind it, and basically like paying everybody to be there, and that the Parkland actors are crisis actors. And I mean, part of me doesn't want to pay any attention to it, but at the same time, I see that like people really, really believe it, and it's kind of like, I don't know. So I guess I'm
Yeah.
wondering, like, how do you kind of
I've seen a
manage?
lot of that, and when I look at who the people are who believe it, they tend to be of an older generation that is not the young people, and is, uh, I think that is why these students in particular are being so effective, is because they've grown up with social media and Twitter, and have the ability to deal with trolls, and like
Yeah.
our generation or above is able to. They are just not affected by it. They grew up with it. It's just something they know day to day, and they just ignore it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really gives them a lot of power, because I mean, it's just noise, and it's going back to, talking about, what's enticing, right? But the other side of that is it's also what stops change. And there is incentive for these lobbying groups and for politicians to keep us divided, and silence that kind of gray area, because it stops change from happening. If we were meeting in the middle to actually talk about solutions would be occurring, and we'd be making change. So I think that's kind of, and I don't think that's new, right? I think you look at any movement, and I think that's just how it works. You have people trying to stop change, and people trying to create change, whether you agree with the change or not. But the tactics of how each group does it is kind of always been the same. Of course, it adapts now with the internet age and stuff like that. But at the root, it's all what's the intention. It's not really about, a lot of the time, actually solving real issues, which is a shame.
Right, right. And it's not like trolls are, mindful of age and things like that. And so, it's
Hmm.
like I think as I'm watching it bugged me more than like it usually doesn't bug me at all, and I don't even really pay much attention to it. But this time, like I kept finding myself getting like a little offended and having, feeling like these are young people, like what are, what's wrong with people, what are they do? But then I'm like, you know what, but like you're right, it's just part of that noise, and that's kind of just it's just part of it, you know.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think you see that. I mean, you're just always going to see it. So I just try not to be uh, affected by it. And I think the amount, based on the amount of people who showed up, and from the people, Republican, Democrat, all different economic levels, the people I've been talking to, I think the vast majority, even if they don't agree with gun control, saw the demonstration through kind of a positive civil lens. I think those who kind of really tried to create I mean, it's a false narrative of kind of
Right.
these kids being bought out and all this stuff, I think is really a very small portion of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I just loved, I think that it was the inclusion again. Like you had Yolanda Renee King, um,
Hmm.
and I thought that was an interesting thing, going back to what we were talking about, because I think out of all the kind of uh, condescending remarks I felt the most I was seeing were not, they weren't at her, but at the inclusion of her because she was so young, which I thought was interesting because she really didn't say anything beyond a general kind of idea of what her grandfather would have said, right? She didn't come out and say, we need this kind of gun control and I support like all these things that clearly someone her age isn't going to understand. She basically came out and said, I have a dream that I'll be safe at school. And I thought, I mean, for me, it was very powerful, for that intersectionality, but also just for the activist kind of mentality, and fight for change, and just seeing that this is something that really touches each generation, and empowers each generation in their own way, and to see his granddaughter kind of already being engaged and having such a strong moral compass, I guess, is just wonderful to see.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very inspiring, just kind of, yeah, it was a very inspiring thing to watch.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, I guess, where it goes, because it's kind of similar to what we talked after the women's marches. These marches now are so well organized because of social media, and the reach um, is so large that they are these huge events. But it's always interesting to see kind of what effect they actually have beyond people feeling like there's solidarity.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that the Parkland activists are really talking about already addressing. I think,
Hmm.
it's still early enough that like we aren't far enough out where where we'll really be able to see how it goes. But I think that's one of the things that they've been intentional in talking about, and like scheduling things. I know there's a march, or I can't remember if it's a school walkout or a march, but there's something in April um, next month, and just kind of keeping things going and intentionally continuing to do the work, and continuing to kind of um, make this their mission. So I'm
Hmm.
excited to see how they continue to like keep us engaged and keep that movement going, because I think like this is something that they've already kind of talked about, that we've seen this peter out before, we've seen these things peter out, and we don't want that to happen again, and we're not letting that happen again. So
Yeah.
I'm inspired to see, because I feel like if anybody can keep things going and keep us working towards change, I think that what we're seeing from this group, that they can do it.
Man, I think the power they'll have is very much growing, especially in that intersectionality, because even just involving Black Lives Matter as much as they did, and I've already seen a lot from the students talking about the recent police shootings that have happened and stuff like that, and kind of bringing that all together, bringing in what's happening in Chicago, all that stuff, I think gives them more power, because it shows that all these groups are now unifying as opposed to being separate. And when you're unified, you're just harder to, when you're all separate, it's easier to kind of manipulate and keep you down. But the more we all unify, the harder it is. So
Totally. Yeah, that's our strength. And I think, kind of referencing back to what you were saying earlier, there's these forces that kind of try to keep things separate and try to get us to not see the intersectionality and work together. But the more we can kind of recognize that we're really working towards a lot of the same things, I think that, like, we'll continue to be stronger. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important it's hard because clearly we try to stay as mindful as possible, but we clearly have a political leaning of our own. And I think, I'm very progressive, and it's interesting because I think I try to engage more and more with people who aren't, and try to find a way to have meaningful dialogue. And I think an important part of that is, and this isn't really related to the march or anything, but I think an important part of that is really doing a lot of mindfulness and kind of self-reflection of what is important to you, and make sure that you are holding everyone to the same standards, not just those you oppose. Because I was talking to, there was a friend of mine had a Facebook post, and posted about one of the students in his speeches, and instantly there was a lot of like, well, they're not taking my guns, and trying to discredit the kid, and someone posted a Fox News article that had a picture of the kid at the end raising his fist, which anyone who's an activist knows that is a symbol for unity and for solidarity, and has been sent for 100 years. But it's very clearly intentionally cut off the top of his head, so it looked like he was doing a Nazi salute. And a lot of people were kind of commenting on that, so I went in, and I hadn't commented for a while, but I just kind of put up like the difference between those two gestures, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of people acknowledged like, oh, well, good, he didn't do that, but, and then had like a new kind of talking point, and all I said was, well, I'm not going to argue with you about guns versus not guns, because that wasn't the intent of what was posted. I'm just basically telling you he wasn't doing a Nazi salute, and here's the difference, and we should all agree whether that this type of propaganda is not useful, whether it's something we want to believe or coming from the side we feel we're a part of, or not the other. It's like Occupy Democrats. They post a lot of things that are basically the liberal version of Fox News, and I'm consistently posting articles that show that whatever they're posting is not factually correct, even though I would love it to be factually correct because I'm a progressive, but the reality is it's not, and having propaganda on either side is not helpful to us actually fixing problems and moving forward. I guess any last words on this topic?
No, I can't really think of anything. I'm just going to be, just excited to see what happens and kind of how things continue to move forward, because I really do feel like there's a shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, getting the people engaged is the biggest thing, because, I mean, all the polls show that, whether you agree with it or not, the polls show that, I mean, the majority of Americans support these basic gun reforms. So as soon as we are able to get past the lobbying forces, if we can get past the lobbying forces, which very well may never happen, the change will happen. So that's really the fight that's happening, and I think the fight that the kids are aware of, because I think that's also why they don't engage with the trolls, because they realize the trolls really have no power in this. They're such a small minority, and they're not actually influencing anything, because public opinion doesn't agree with the trolls. So they're really focused on the lobbyists, on the NRA, on the organizations that they feel are contributing to gun violence, whether you agree with that or not. But that's what they're doing to try to be effective.
Yeah, and the organizations that are hindering the change that the people already recognize that they want.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't think I have any homework, unless, I mean, there's some great speeches. The Emma Gonzalez speech I thought was great. The Yolanda Renee King, the Naomi Wedler. Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, Naomi's speech was probably the best of the event, in my opinion, in that it really got to the heart of the intersectionality and the privilege, and how really big these issues are.
Yeah, she's 11.
I know.
Years old. It's just incredible. I was just like so inspired by these kids. I was like watching and like crying and happy, and yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's why it's hard for me not to laugh when I do see things about, well, they're just kids, they don't know any better, and I'm listening to them speak in these speeches, and not even just the speeches, in these interviews that they're doing that are not scripted in any way, and I'm like, they're more articulate and have more statistics and resources than the vast majority of adults I know. So I mean, I have no problem trusting those kids leading a movement that I fully support.
Yeah, totally. I 100% agree. So homework is, if you hadn't watched the speeches, then definitely watch the speeches. And also check out Vic Mensa's performance, We Could Be Free. That song is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Really good
Awesome.
performance.
Okay. Well, see everybody, or you'll hear us next week. We'll be back.
Yes. See you next time.